At 3,000 feet above the Mediterranean Sea, an Airbus A320 is already in landing configuration gear down. Flaps set for landing. In just 35 seconds, its speed drops from 136 knots to 99. The horizontal stabilizer trims all the way to the nose-up stop, and then the stall warning sounds. The crew expects the aircraft's protections to catch them before it gets this far, but the protections do not arrive not the way they've been briefed to expect. This was not a scheduled passenger flight. It was a check flight at the end of a leasing agreement, part of the process of handing an aircraft back to its owner. The aircraft, an A320-232, registration DAAXLA, had been brought to Perpignan earlier in November for maintenance and repainting at a local approved organization. It was released back to service on 27 November, only hours before the flight. 7 people were on board, 2 operating pilots and 5 observers. They were not there for a normal trip. They were there to watch, document, and validate a program of checks tied to the lease return and then travel onward to Frankfurt Airport. The weather around Perpignan was not dramatic, but it wasn't perfect either. Light, rain, broken cloud, and a cloud base around the low thousands of feet. It was flyable, but it added texture to every decision, especially near the sea. The flight had been planned for a long block time over 2.5 hours, yet departure slipped. Takeoff did not occur until 14:44 UTC, around 2 hours after the scheduled time in the flight plan. And from the start, the flight encountered operational friction. Minutes after departure, the crew asked air traffic control for maneuvering specifically a 360. The request was denied. The controller told them they could not undertake test maneuvers in general air traffic, and that the flight plan they had filed was not compatible with what they were asking to do. In France, test or check flights typically require coordination, often including dedicated airspace, so maneuvers don't collide with routine traffic flow. The Air Navigation Service guidance described advance notice and warned that, without prior agreement, limitations could be imposed or requests refused. So the flight changed shape in real time. Instead of a structured check program in a planned box, the crew would have to adapt, compress checks, and improvise around ATC constraints. About half an hour after takeoff, the aircraft turned back toward Perpignan. It climbed as high as flight level 390, then began descending back into the approach environment, where workload naturally rises and margins naturally shrink. To understand what happened next, we need to be precise about how an A320 protects itself. The A320 uses fly-wire-wire flight controls. The side stick is not mechanically linked to the control surfaces. Instead, pilot inputs are electrical signals processed by computers, which send commands to actuators that move the aircraft's aerodynamic surfaces. Those computers operate under different flight control laws. In normal law, the baseline, the aircraft provides multiple protections: limits in pitch and bank attitude, load factor protection, high-speed protection, and low-speed angle attack protections. In normal law, pitch trimming is automatic. Auto trim continuously positions the stabilizer to maintain the demanded flight path. If systems degrade, the aircraft can revert to alternate law or direct law. Alternate law retains the same basic style of control, but with fewer protections. Direct law removes automatic pitch trimming control surfaces, respond more directly to pilot input, with only limited protections remaining. This is a critical change because it shifts stabilizer management back onto the crew. Now, the low-speed protections. At low speed, stall risk is fundamentally an angle of attack story. Exceed the critical AOA, and lift collapses. Airbus designs normal law protections to keep the aircraft within its safe flight envelope, including protections against high angle of attack and low-energy states. The BEA interim report described the A320's AOA protection logic in concrete terms. When the aircraft decelerates below VLS, the lowest selectable speed the AOA can reach, alpha prot. In normal law, reaching alpha prot triggers a protection that commands pitch down and stops automatic pitch up trimming. If deceleration continues to alpha floor, maximum available thrust is automatically applied to regain speed. For this check flight, the crew intended to observe those protections essentially to watch the system intervene as the aircraft approached its low-speed limits. During cruise at flight level 320, the recorded left and right local angles of attack should have varied subtly as the aircraft moved through air. Instead, from 15 hours, 4 minutes and 3 seconds onward, they barely changed, recorded around 3.8 and 4.2 degrees. It is a small detail in the data, but it is the beginning of the end. In the final investigation, conclusions reported by aviation safety specialists and industry publications, investigators determined that the AOA sensors had not been protected during a water rinsing process carried out at the maintenance organization 3 days before the accident. Water entered at least 2 of the sensors. Later, at cruise altitude, that water froze, blocking the sensors and preventing accurate AOA information. This mattered because the A320's low-speed protections depend on reliable AOA data. If the sensors are wrong, the computed protection thresholds can be wrong, and a crew waiting for protections may not recognize how far into danger they have already drifted. At 15 hours, 33 minutes and 34 seconds UTC, the aircraft was descending and contacted approach. For about 40 seconds, from 15 hours, 38 minutes and 3 seconds, the observer pilot described actions for a low-speed check planned in the program. ATC vectored the aircraft and asked the crew to maintain 180 knots. The approach controller also asked twice for the crew's intentions. The captain indicated that the low-speed check should probably be carried out later, possibly during the post-approach sector toward Frankfurt, or not performed. But the plan shifted again as the aircraft descended below cloud and workload rose. Here is what matters operationally: Airbus acceptance. Check procedures described in the investigation reporting expected such low-speed demonstrations to be done with altitude margins and in appropriate conditions not down near the surface where recovery energy is limited. In the accounts of the final report, the low-speed check was supposed to be conducted far higher, around flight level 140 inches, the referenced acceptance procedures, and no lower than flight level 100 inches, the check guidance cited by investigators. But this crew began configuring for the maneuver while descending through only a few thousand feet above the sea, 15 hours, 43 minutes and 37 seconds UTC. The captain announces he is passing below the cloud layer and disconnects the autopilot. He asks the observer pilot what he wants next, meaning what part of the check program to prioritize. The briefing is focused on activating alpha floor protection. During this exchange, the captain calls for gear extension and sets the thrust levers to idle. 15小时44分30秒. The aircraft is stabilized at 3,000 feet in full landing configuration. Within 35 seconds, speed drops from 136 knots to 99 knots. The horizontal stabilizer runs to the pitch-up stop. The stall warning sounds. The thrust levers are advanced toward 2 GA. Engine thrust increases symmetrically, but the speed still drops further down to about 92.5 knots before beginning to recover. The aircraft begins rolling left, then right. The captain counters. 15小时45分15秒. The flight control laws change to direct law. At that moment, the bank angle is recorded at 50 degrees right. In direct law, automatic pitch trimming is no longer available. The stabilizer already at the nose-up stop does not help the way it did in normal law. This is where a fly-by-wire aircraft can feel unfamiliar, not because it is fighting, but because the rules have changed underneath the pilot's hands. 15小时45分19秒. The stall warning stops briefly. The aircraft is banked left, about 40 degrees. 1 second later, pitch is about 7 degrees, wings nearly level, speed 138 knots. Then pitch and altitude begin to increase again. The stall warning sounds for a second time. The landing gear is retracted. The pitch control law changes to alternate. 15 hours 45 minutes and 44 seconds. Maximum recorded values: pitch 57 degrees nose up, altitude about 3,800 feet, speed below 40 knots. A large transport aircraft is now deep into a stalled condition, near the sea, with shrinking time and shrinking options. The stall warning stops, then returns. The aircraft banks right up to 97 degrees, and pitch reaches 42 degrees nose down. Control inputs continue. Configuration change continue. But the clock is merciless. At 15 hours 46 minutes and 6 seconds, that 8, the last recorded parameters show the aircraft very low, around 340 feet, with high speed recorded and a descending attitude. Less than a second later, it impacts the sea. In industry reporting of the final investigation findings, impact occurred roughly a minute after the initial stall alarm time measured in heartbeats, not minutes. This accident is often misunderstood as automation gone wrong. The more accurate reading is harsher. This was a flight designed to confirm the aircraft's safety envelope performed with reduced margin, while the very sensors needed for those protections were compromised. Investigators concluded that the AOA sensors were blocked by ice after water ingress, and that the crew did not know the sensors were no longer functioning correctly. As a result, the low-speed Anglia attack protections could not trigger as expected during the demonstration. The check flight procedure described by investigators relied on clear cues: reaching VLS, then approaching Alpha Prot, and expecting the aircraft to respond through protective behaviors and, at Alpha Floor, through maximum thrust. But, with AOA sensing compromised, that roadmap became unreliable, and when the aircraft reverted into a degraded control law, it removed automatic trim logic, leaving the stabilizer at a significant nose-up position. That matters because stall recovery is not a power problem first. It is a reduce angle of attack problem first. A stabilizer trim nose-up makes that harder, especially close to the surface. The investigation was led by BEA. Because the aircraft was German-operated and the occupants included New Zealand nationals, multiple states participated under international investigation norms, with UK investigative assistance also noted in the early investigation phase. Flight recorders were located and recovered in the days after the crash. But the most durable impact of this accident was not just technical, it was organizational. The BEA issued safety recommendations aimed at the gap around non-revenue and maintenance, acceptance check flights that look routine on paper, but can carry test chair flight risk in practice. In response, European Union Aviation Safety Agency reviewed and later advanced rulemaking to define minimum requirements for maintenance check flights, clearer operational frameworks, dedicated manuals and flight check programs for higher-risk check flights, coordination with continuing airworthiness and maintenance organizations, and training, experience expectations for crews conducting such flights. The operational lesson is blunt. If a flight includes test-like maneuvers, it must be treated as a test-like operation planned, authorized, and resourced accordingly, not improvised inside routine air traffic. 7 people died in this accident. 2 operating pilots. 5 observers who expected to go home after a work trip. In the reporting that followed, families described futures, interrupted partners, children, ordinary plans that never got the chance to become memories. One of the engineers, Noel Marsh, was reported to have left a pregnant wife and 2 young sons. This is why aviation safety language can feel cold, because it has to carry grief without exploiting it. In the end, Flight 888 Tango is not a ghost story about a plane with a mind of its own. It is a story about a modern aircraft built to protect its crew, a crew placed under pressure, and a chain of small procedural and technical realities that, together, erase the margin that safety depends on.